The morning sun painted the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold as Jake stepped onto the research ship. At 28, he had dreamed of this moment his entire life. Being a marine biologist wasn't just his job, it was his calling. The vessel stretched out before him, sleek and modern, equipped with the latest technology for deep-sea research. "This is it," he whispered to himself, running his hand along the polished railing. The ship would be his home for the next 3 weeks, and he would be completely alone out here. No crew, no captain, no other scientists. Just him and the endless blue ocean. The ship's computer system had been programmed to handle everything. Navigation, weather monitoring, even emergency protocols. All Jake had to do was focus on his research. He was here to study something incredible, tiny sea creatures that could create their own light. These bioluminescent organisms were like living stars in the dark depths of the ocean. As the automated systems fired up the engines, Jake felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He had been on research trips before, but never alone like this. The cost of hiring a full crew was enormous, and his research grant barely covered the essentials. Going solo was risky, but it was the only way to make his dream project happen. The first day passed quickly as Jake familiarized himself with every corner of the ship. The main lab was his favorite space, filled with microscopes, sample containers, and monitoring equipment. Large windows offered a perfect view of the ocean. He could already imagine the discoveries waiting for him in the deep waters ahead. By evening, the shore had completely disappeared from view. Jake stood on the deck, watching the sun sink into the horizon. The silence was profound. No city sounds, no human voices, just the gentle rhythm of waves against the hull. The first time in his life, he was truly alone with nature. The second day brought new challenges. Jake had to learn how to manage everything by himself, preparing meals, maintaining equipment, and collecting samples. The ship's robotic arms could gather specimens from the ocean floor, but he needed to analyze everything manually. Each sample was like opening a treasure chest, revealing secrets that had been hidden in the darkness for millions of years. As night fell on his second day, Jake began his evening routine. He prepared a simple dinner and settled into the lab to examine the day's findings. Under the microscope, the organisms glowed with an ethereal blue light. They seemed to communicate through their bioluminescence, creating patterns that looked almost like a language. "If only I could understand what you're trying to say," he murmured, adjusting the microscope settings. The creatures pulsed and flickered, their light dancing across the lab walls. It was beautiful and mysterious at the same time, and Jake opened his research journal and began typing his daily log entry. His fingers moved across the keyboard as he documented his observations, theories, and the strange sense of connection he felt with these tiny life forms. The ship gently rocked in the calm seas, and the only sounds were the hum of machinery and the distant whisper of ocean waves. Day 2 of solo research expedition, he typed, collected over 30 specimens of bioluminescent organisms. Initial observations suggest complex communication patterns. The isolation is intense, but I'm starting to understand why some researchers prefer working alone. There's something pure about this. Just me and the mysteries of the deep. He paused. Looking out at the dark ocean through the lab window, millions of stars reflected on the water's surface, creating a mirror image of the night sky. The sight was breathtaking, but it also made him acutely aware of how small he was in this vast universe. The ship's automated systems hummed quietly. In the background, monitoring everything from weather patterns to the vessel's position. Jake had grown comfortable with the sounds. They were like a technological lullaby that reminded him he wasn't completely cut off from civilization. The communication system could reach emergency services if needed, but for now, he was content to be disconnected from the busy world he had left behind. As the third day dawned, Jake had settled into a comfortable routine. Morning coffee on the deck, equipment checks, sample collection, afternoon analysis, and evening documentation. The work was demanding but fulfilling. Each day brought new discoveries, new questions, and new possibilities. The organisms he was studying seemed to be more complex than anyone had previously imagined. Their light patterns weren't random. They showed signs of organization, purpose, and even what might be considered intelligence. Jake found himself spending hours just watching them, trying to decode their luminous messages. The isolation was becoming more noticeable now. Jake had always been comfortable with solitude, but this was different. The endless horizon in every direction, the absence of any human presence, and the constant awareness that he was hundreds of miles from the nearest land created a unique psychological environment. It was both liberating and slightly unsettling. During quiet moments, Jake would video call his research partner back at the university, sharing his findings and discussing theories. These brief connections to the outside world were precious, reminding him that his work had meaning beyond his personal satisfaction. The scientific community was eagerly waiting for his results, and the pressure to make significant discoveries was always present. As his fourth day at sea approached, Jake felt a growing sense of accomplishment. He was proving that solo research expeditions could be successful, and his preliminary findings were already suggesting that these bioluminescent creatures might be far more important to ocean ecosystems than anyone had realized. The ship continued its programmed course through the deep Pacific, carrying Jake toward discoveries that would change everything he thought he knew about life in the ocean's depths. The fourth morning started like any other. Jake woke up to the gentle rocking of the ship and the familiar sound of waves against the hull. He made his usual cup of coffee and headed to the lab, ready for another day of research. But something felt different. Couldn't quite put his finger on it, but the atmosphere on the ship seemed to have changed overnight. As Jake entered the lab, he immediately noticed that one of his sample containers had been moved. He distinctly remembered placing it on the left side of the counter before going to bed, but now it sat on the right side. Jake scratched his head, trying to remember if he might have moved it and forgotten. The isolation was getting to him more than he wanted to admit. It must be the stress, he muttered to himself, repositioning the container where he remembered leaving it. But as he worked throughout the morning, more small inconsistencies began to catch his attention. That he was certain he had covered was now uncovered. Some equipment cables seemed to be arranged differently than before. Jake tried to focus on his research, but these little mysteries kept nagging at him. He had always been detail-oriented, and his memory was usually sharp. The bioluminescent organisms in his samples continued to glow and pulse, but even they seemed to be behaving strangely. Their light patterns appeared more active, more urgent than in previous days. During lunch, Jake decided to do a thorough check of his supplies. He opened the refrigerator where he kept his food for the 3-week journey. Something was wrong. The sandwich he had made the night before was missing 2 bites, but he clearly remembered only taking 1 bite before saving the rest for today. His yogurt container was nearly empty, though he was sure it had been half full. "This is ridiculous," Jake said aloud, his voice echoing in the empty galley. "I'm losing my mind out here." Tried to rationalize everything. Maybe he was eating more than he realized due to the stress of being alone. Maybe the ship's movement was causing things to shift around. But deep down, a nagging feeling told him that something wasn't right. That afternoon, Jake decided to review the ship's security footage. Every research vessel was equipped with cameras for safety and insurance purposes. He accessed the computer system and began scrolling through the recordings from the past few days. Most of the footage showed exactly what he expected: empty corridors, his own movements around the ship, and the steady rhythm of ocean life. But then, at timestamp 2:47 a.m. from the previous night, Jake saw something that made his blood freeze. In the grainy footage from the corridor outside his quarters, a shadow moved across the wall. It was just for a few seconds, but it was definitely there. The shadow was human-shaped, but it couldn't be him because he was asleep in his room. At that time, Jake rewound the footage and watched it again and again. Each time, the shadow was there, moving silently through the corridor. His hands began to shake as he realized what this meant. Either the isolation was causing him to hallucinate, or he wasn't alone on this ship. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and confusion. Jake found himself jumping at every sound, constantly looking over his shoulder. The ship's normal creaking and mechanical noises now seemed threatening. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every reflection in the windows made him pause. As evening approached, Jake decided to do a complete search of the ship. He grabbed a flashlight and methodically went through every room, every storage area, every possible hiding place. The ship wasn't enormous, but it had plenty of spaces where someone could potentially hide. He checked the engine room, the storage compartments, even the emergency equipment lockers. Nothing. He found absolutely nothing out of place. No signs of another person. But Jake's scientific training had taught him to trust evidence over assumptions. The moved equipment, the missing food, the shadow in the security footage, these were facts, not imagination. That night, Jake barely slept. Every sound made him alert. Every creak of the ship sent adrenaline coursing through his veins. He kept his door locked and placed a chair against it for extra security. The rational part of his mind kept telling him that he was alone, that the isolation was playing tricks on him. But another part of him, the part that had learned to trust his instincts during years of fieldwork, insisted that something was very wrong. The next morning brought new evidence. Jake found muddy footprints on the deck near the stern of the ship. They were small, smaller than his own feet, and they led from the railing to a door that accessed the lower levels of the vessel. The prints were fresh, still damp from the morning mist. Jake's heart raced as he followed the footprints. They led through a corridor he rarely used, past some mechanical equipment, and then simply disappeared near a junction where several passages met. It was as if whoever had made them had simply vanished into thin air. The footprints changed everything. Jake could no longer convince himself that he was imagining things. Someone else was on this ship, someone who was very good at staying hidden. But who were they? How had they gotten aboard? And why were they hiding from him? Jake spent the rest of the day trying to set up a system to catch this mysterious person. He rigged some of his research equipment to act as motion sensors in key areas of the ship. He also began leaving small, almost invisible markers in various locations to see if they would be disturbed. As the sun set on his 5th day at sea, Jake felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. The scientist in him was fascinated by this mystery, eager to solve the puzzle, but the human in him was genuinely scared. He was hundreds of miles from any help alone on a ship with someone who didn't want to be found. That night, Jake made a decision. Instead of hiding in his room, he would wait in the lab with the lights off. If this mysterious person was real, if they were moving around the ship at night, he would be ready to confront them. He positioned himself where he could see the main corridor and settled in to wait. The hours passed slowly. Jake's eyes grew heavy, but he forced himself to stay alert. Then, just after midnight, he heard it. The soft sound of footsteps in the corridor outside the lab. Someone was walking very quietly, trying not to make any noise. Jake's heart pounded as the footsteps grew closer. This was it. After days of questions and uncertainty, he was finally going to get answers. He gripped his flashlight tightly and prepared to face whatever or whoever had been sharing his ship. Jake's hands trembled as he gripped the flashlight in the darkness of the lab. The footsteps in the corridor were getting closer, soft and deliberate. His breathing became shallow as he tried to stay completely silent. After days of mystery and uncertainty, he was finally going to discover who had been sharing his ship. The footsteps stopped right outside the lab door. Jake held his breath, waiting. For what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, there was complete silence. Then slowly, the door handle began to turn. Jake's finger hovered over the flashlight switch. His scientific training battled with pure human fear. That part of him wanted to hide, to pretend he wasn't there. But another part, the part that had driven him to become a researcher, needed to know the truth. The door opened with a barely audible creak. A figure stepped into the lab, moving with careful practiced steps. In the dim light from the ocean outside, Jake could see it was a person, but the details were unclear. They seemed to know exactly where they were going, navigating the lab equipment without making a sound. Jake watched in fascination as the mysterious figure approached his research samples. They moved with purpose, clearly familiar with scientific equipment. This wasn't some random stowaway. This person understood his work. Taking a deep breath, Jake made his decision. He flicked on the flashlight and aimed it at the intruder. Don't move! He shouted, his voice cracking slightly from stress and surprise. The figure froze instantly, caught in the beam of light. Jake's jaw dropped as he saw who had been haunting his ship for the past several days. It was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with striking features and long dark hair. She wore unusual clothing that looked both practical and elegant, unlike anything Jake had seen before. What shocked Jake most was her complete lack of fear. Instead of panic or surprise, she looked at him with calm, intelligent eyes. It was as if she had been expecting this moment. "Please don't be afraid," she said in accented English, her voice soft but confident. "I'm not here to hurt you." Jake's mind raced. A woman? How had a woman gotten onto his research ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? Where had she come from? How long had she been here? "Who are you?" Jake managed to ask, keeping the flashlight. "Trained on her? How did you get on my ship?" The woman raised her hand slowly, showing she meant no harm. "My name is Luna," she said. "I know this must be confusing for you. I've been watching your work for several days now. Watching my work." Jake's voice rose. "You've been spying on me? How is that even possible? This ship left port with only me on board?" Luna took a small step forward, her movements graceful and unthreatening.
Oh.
"I know it's hard to believe, but I'm a researcher too. I studied the same organisms you've been collecting. I represent a specialized institute that monitors marine research in this area." Jake's flashlight beam wavered as his hand shook. Nothing she was saying made sense. What institute? Why didn't anyone tell me about this? And how did you get here? "The institute I work for operates very differently from traditional research. Organizations," Luna explained. "We monitor important discoveries and sometimes intervene when necessary. Your work with bioluminescent organisms is more significant than you realize." Jake's scientific mind began to process what she was saying, but it still didn't add up. "That's impossible. I would have been informed if another research team was operating in this area. You still haven't explained how you got onto my ship." Luna smiled slightly, and Jake noticed that her eyes seemed to reflect the light in an unusual way. "I arrived by submarine 3 days ago. I've been living in the lower sections of your ship, in areas you don't regularly visit." "A submarine?" Jake's voice was filled with disbelief. "There's no way a submarine could approach this ship without being detected by the radar systems." "Our submarines are quite advanced," Luna said simply. "It's much more advanced than standard technology." Jake lowered the flashlight slightly, his curiosity beginning to overcome his fear. This woman, Luna, didn't seem dangerous, but her explanations were raising more questions than answers. Her accent was unusual, not quite matching any nationality he could identify. Her clothing looked like it was made from materials he didn't recognize. And there was something about her presence that seemed almost otherworldly. "Prove it," Jake said finally. "Show me this submarine. Show me your credentials. Show me something that proves you're telling the truth." Luna nodded as if she had been expecting this request. "I can do that. First, I need you to understand something important. Your research has attracted attention from people who don't have the ocean's best interest at heart. That's why my institute sent me to observe and, if necessary, protect your work." "Protect my work from what?" Jake asked, lowering the flashlight completely now. Despite the bizarre circumstances, something about Luna seemed trustworthy. "There are organizations that would use your discoveries for harmful purposes," Luna explained. "The organisms you're studying aren't just interesting specimens. They're part of a much larger ecosystem that most surface dwellers don't understand." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Surface dwellers? That's an odd way to put it." Luna paused as if she had said something she shouldn't have. "I mean, people who live on land, as opposed to those who work primarily in marine environments?" But Jake's trained ear had caught the slip. There was something more to Luna's story, something she wasn't telling him. The way she spoke, the way she moved, even the way she seemed to understand his equipment better than she should have. It all pointed to secrets much deeper than she was revealing. "I want to see your submarine," Jake said firmly. "I want to see your research credentials. If you're really here to help, then you need to prove it." Luna studied his face for a long moment, as if making a difficult decision. "Very well," she said finally. "But I need you to promise me something first. What I'm about to show you will change everything you think you know about ocean research. Are you prepared for that?" Jake's heart was pounding with excitement and fear. His entire career had been built on discovering new things, on pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Now he was faced with the possibility of a discovery that could revolutionize everything he believed about marine science. "I'm a scientist," Jake said, his voice growing stronger. "I've dedicated my life to understanding the unknown. Whatever you have to show me, I'm ready." Luna smiled, and for the first time, Jake saw genuine warmth in her expression. "Then follow me," she said. "But remember, once you see what I'm about to show you, there's no going back to the simple world you knew before." As Luna turned toward the door, Jake realized that his quiet research expedition had just become the adventure of a lifetime. He followed her into the corridor, his mind racing with possibilities and questions. Whatever secrets Luna was hiding, whatever truths she was about to reveal, Jake knew that his life would never be the same again. The bioluminescent organisms in his lab continued to glow softly in the darkness, their light patterns more active than ever, as if they too sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. Jake followed Luna through the dimly lit corridors of the ship, his heart pounding with anticipation. She moved with a confidence that suggested she knew the vessel better than he did, which was impossible since this was his research expedition. Every step they took deeper into the ship's lower levels raised more questions in his mind.
"How long have you really been on this ship?"
Jake asked as they walked down a narrow staircase he rarely used. Luna glanced back at him. "Since the second day of your voyage. I've been very careful to stay out of your way, but I needed to observe your research methods and results." "But why?" Jake pressed. "What's so special about my work that it requires secret observation?" Luna stopped at a heavy door that Jake had assumed led to mechanical equipment. "You'll understand soon enough," she said, pulling out what looked like a small electronic device. She held it against the door lock, and Jake heard a soft beeping sound. "That's not a standard ship key," Jake observed, his scientific mind cataloging every detail. "No, it's not," Luna admitted, pushing the door open. "My equipment is more advanced than what you're used to." They entered a section of the ship that Jake had never seen before. The walls were lined with equipment that looked nothing like the standard research gear he was familiar with. Screens displayed data and symbols he didn't recognize, and devices hummed with energy that seemed far more sophisticated than anything in his lab. "This is impossible," Jake whispered, turning in a slow circle to take in everything around him. "This equipment, it's not from any manufacturer I know. And how did you install all this without me noticing?" Luna walked to one of the larger screens and began operating controls that seemed to respond to her touch in ways that defied Jake's understanding of technology. "My people have been monitoring your research because the organisms you're studying are far more important than your scientific community realizes." "Your people," Jake repeated, focusing on her choice of words. "You keep saying things that suggest you're not working with any normal research institute?" Luna turned to face him, and Jake saw a mixture of determination and concern in her eyes. "That's because I'm not. Jake, the bioluminescent organisms you've been collecting aren't just interesting sea creatures. They're part of a communication network that spans the entire ocean." Jake's mind raced as he tried to process this information. A communication network. That's incredible if it's true. But how could my research community not know? "About this? Because your research community studies the ocean from above," Luna explained. "You send down equipment, you collect samples, you observe from the surface. But you don't truly live in the ocean. You don't understand it the way we." "Do we?" Jake asked, though he was starting to suspect he already knew the answer. Luna moved to another console and began pulling up displays that showed underwater footage unlike anything Jake had ever seen.
"Ow."
The images showed vast structures beneath the ocean floor, cities that seemed to pulse with the same bioluminescent light as the organisms in his samples. "This is what your scientific instruments can't detect," Luna said softly. "An entire civilization that has existed in the deep ocean for thousands of years. The organisms you're studying are how we communicate. Across vast distances underwater." Jake stared at the images, his scientific training warring with the impossibility of what he was seeing. "You're saying you're from some kind of underwater civilization? That's beyond anything we've ever discovered." "Not beyond," Luna corrected. "It's hidden. We've worked very hard to remain hidden from surface dwellers. Art. But your research is getting close to exposing our existence, and that's why I was sent to observe you." Jake sat down heavily on a nearby chair, his mind struggling to accept what he was hearing. "If this is true, if you really are from an underwater civilization, then you're not entirely human, are you?" Luna was quiet for a long moment. "We were human once. Thousands of years ago, when the oceans rose and the climate changed dramatically, some humans adapted. We didn't just learn to live with the ocean, we became part of it. We evolved, developed new abilities, created new technologies." "Show me," Jake said suddenly. "If you want me to believe this, show me proof that you're not just an incredibly skilled liar with advanced technology." Luna nodded as if she had been expecting this request. She walked to what looked like a pool of water built into the floor of the room. Jake hadn't noticed it before, but now he could see that it connected to the ocean through some kind of opening in the ship's hull. "This is how I've been coming and going from your ship," Luna explained. "And this is how I'll prove to you that everything I've told you is true." Luna began to remove her unusual clothing, revealing what looked like a second skin underneath that shimmered with an iridescent quality. As Jake watched in amazement, the material seemed to adapt and change, becoming more streamlined and functional. "My people developed biotechnology centuries ago," Luna explained. "We don't just use tools, we integrate them into our bodies. This suit allows me to survive in the deep ocean pressures that would kill a surface human." She stepped into the pool and Jake watched as her movements became more fluid and graceful. But what happened next made his jaw drop. Luna's eyes began to glow with the same bioluminescent light as the organisms in his samples. Patterns of light appeared on her skin, pulsing and shifting in complex sequences. "The organisms you're studying respond to us because we're part of the same biological network," Luna explained, her voice somehow carrying clearly through the water. "We don't just communicate with technology, we communicate with light, with the living systems of the ocean itself." Jake knelt beside the pool, his scientific mind racing with the implications. "This changes everything. If there's an entire civilization living in the ocean, if humans evolved to adapt to underwater life, the implications for biology, for evolution, for our understanding of our own planet." "Exactly," Luna said, stepping back out of the pool. "And that's why we've remained hidden. Your surface world isn't ready for this knowledge, but your research is getting too close to our secrets." Jake looked up at her, water dripping from her transformed appearance. "What does that mean for me, for my research?"
Ow.
Luna's expression grew serious. "That depends on what you choose to do with this knowledge. My people sent me to evaluate whether you could be trusted with our secrets. Whether you're someone who would use this discovery to help or to harm." "I'm a scientist," Jake said firmly. "I've dedicated my life to understanding the natural world. This discovery is the most important thing that's ever happened to me, but I wouldn't do anything to harm an entire civilization." Luna studied his face carefully. "I believe you're sincere, but you need to understand the full situation before you make any decisions. There are others who know about your research, others who would use any information about my people for their own purposes." "What kind of others?" Jake asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. "Military organizations, corporations that see the ocean as something to be exploited rather than protected. If they learned about our technology, our cities, our way of life, they would stop at nothing to capture and study us." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "And they know about my research?" "They're monitoring all significant marine research. Your discoveries about bioluminescent communication have attracted their attention. That's another reason why I'm here to determine whether your research needs to be protected or ... double quotes." Luna trailed off? "Or what?" Jake asked, though he was afraid he already knew. "Or stopped," Luna finished quietly. "My people will do whatever is necessary to protect our civilization, even if that means ensuring that certain discoveries never reach the surface world." Jake realized that his life had just become far more complicated than he had ever imagined. He was no longer just a marine biologist on a research expedition. He was now caught between two worlds, holding secrets that could change everything, or destroy everything, depending on what he chose to do next. Jake stared at Luna, his mind spinning with the weight of everything he had learned. The hidden chamber around him hummed with alien technology, and the woman before him had just proven that an entire underwater civilization existed beneath the waves. Everything he thought he knew about the world had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. "I need more proof," Jake said finally, his scientific training refusing to let him accept even the most incredible evidence without thorough examination. "What you've shown me is amazing, but I need to understand this completely before I can make any decisions." Luna nodded, understanding his need for certainty. "I hoped you would say that. A true scientist wouldn't accept something this significant." Without proper investigation, she moved to another console and began activating additional systems. "I'm going to show you something that will change your perspective on ocean life forever." The room filled with a soft blue glow as holographic displays materialized in the air around them. Jake gasped as three-dimensional images showed him the ocean as he had never seen it before. Vast cities stretched across the sea floor, connected by channels of flowing light that pulsed with the same bioluminescence he had been studying. "These are our settlements," Luna explained, manipulating the display to show different areas. "We have communities throughout the deep ocean, all connected by the network of organisms you've been researching. What you thought were simple sea creatures are actually living communication cables that span thousands of miles." Jake watched in wonder as the hologram showed schools of bioluminescent organisms carrying messages between underwater cities. The complexity of the system was breathtaking. "How many of you are there?" he asked in amazement. "Millions," Luna replied. "We've been growing and developing for millennia, while your surface world remained unaware of our existence. We've learned to work with the ocean's natural systems instead of fighting against them." The implications hit Jake like a wave. If your people have this level of technology, if you've solved the problems of underwater living, you could help us with climate change, with ocean pollution, with so many environmental challenges. Luna's expression grew sad. "That's exactly why we've remained hidden. Your surface world has a history of taking resources, of conquering and exploiting whatever it discovers. We've watched your civilizations rise and fall, and we've seen what happens when humans find something they want." Jake felt a surge of frustration. Not all of us are like that. There are many people who genuinely want to protect the ocean, to work together for the good of the planet. "I know," Luna said softly. "That's why I was sent to evaluate you specifically. My people have been watching your work for months, studying your methods, your motivations, your character. They wanted to know if you were someone who could be trusted with our greatest secret." Jake's heart raced as he realized the significance of this moment. "And what have you decided?" Luna was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. "I believe you're genuine in your desire to protect marine life. But believing and recommending are two different things. The decision I make will affect not just you, but the safety of my entire civilization." Jake understood the enormous responsibility Luna carried. "What are my options here? What choices do I actually have?" "Three," Luna said, holding up her fingers. "First, you could return to the surface world and continue your research as if none of this ever happened. We would ensure that your samples show normal characteristics and your discoveries would remain within acceptable limits." "That would mean giving up the greatest discovery in human history," Jake said, though he understood why this option existed. "Second," Luna continued, "you could join us. Leave your surface life behind and become part of our underwater civilization. You would have access to knowledge and technology beyond your wildest dreams, but you would never be able to return to your old life." Jake's mind reeled at the possibility. "And the third option?" Luna's expression grew serious. "You could become a bridge between our worlds. Work with us to slowly, carefully introduce concepts that might help both civilizations coexist. But this would be dangerous. There are forces in your world that would stop at nothing to exploit what we've built." Jake walked to the edge of the pool where Luna had demonstrated her abilities. The water reflected the bioluminescent displays around them, creating a mesmerizing pattern of light and color. How much time do I have to decide? Not much, Luna admitted. My people are monitoring surface communications. There's already chatter about your research expedition. Some organizations are planning to intercept your ship when you return to port. What kind of organizations? Jake asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. Military contractors, private research companies, groups that see the ocean as a resource to be harvested rather than a living system to be respected. If they capture your samples and analyze them properly, they might discover traces of our biotechnology. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. If I choose to work as a bridge between our worlds, what would that actually involve? Luna moved beside him, her presence somehow comforting, despite the enormity of the situation. It would mean becoming part of a careful, long-term plan to prepare your world for the knowledge of our existence. You would continue your surface research, but you would also work with us to identify other humans who could be trusted with our secrets. And the danger. Constant, Luna said honestly. There are people who would do anything to get there. Hands on our technology would always be at risk, and so would anyone you worked with. Jake stared into the bioluminescent water, watching the organisms that had brought him to this moment. What do you recommend? If you were in my position, what would you choose? Luna smiled for the first time since their conversation had begun. I think you already know the answer to that. You're a scientist who has dedicated his life to understanding the ocean. Now you have the opportunity to protect it in ways you never imagined possible. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the certainty settle in his chest. I want to be the bridge. I want to work with your people to find a way for our civilizations to coexist safely. Luna's eyes lit up with bioluminescent patterns that Jake now understood were expressions of emotion. I hoped you would choose that path. My people will be pleased to know that their faith in surface dwellers isn't entirely misplaced. Happens now? Jake asked. Now we begin the real work, Luna said. First, we need to modify your research samples so they appear normal to anyone who might examine them. Then we need to establish secure communication methods so you can stay in contact with us after you return to the surface. Luna led him to another section of the chamber where devices Jake couldn't begin to understand were processing his collected specimens. We're creating duplicate samples that will satisfy any scientific analysis, while hiding the true nature of the organism's capabilities and the real samples. Will remain with us where they belong, Luna said, but you'll have access to them whenever you need to further our shared research. Jake watched as his life's work was transformed before his eyes. Instead of feeling loss, he felt excitement. This wasn't the end of his research, it was the beginning of something far more important. There's one more thing you need to understand, Luna said as they worked. Once you make this commitment, there's no going back. You'll be carrying secrets that could change the world or destroy it. Are you prepared for that responsibility? Jake looked around the chamber at the evidence of an entire civilization that had remained hidden for millennia. At Luna, who had trusted him with the greatest secret in Earth's oceans. I've spent my entire career studying life in the sea. Now I have the chance to protect it in ways I never dreamed possible. Yes, I'm ready. As the ship rocked gently in the Pacific swells, Jake realized that his solo research expedition had become the first step in the most important mission of his life. The ocean held secrets more magnificent than he had ever imagined, and now he was part of protecting those secrets for future generations. The bioluminescent organisms in their containers pulsed with renewed energy, as if they too understood that something extraordinary had begun. Jake was no longer just a marine biologist. He was now a guardian of the ocean's greatest mystery. And his real adventure was just beginning.